exciting day. We've already had adventures, which is super cool. So Jonathan Dugan here, and we are here at the Fenton Hotel. We are here to talk a little bit about the history of Fenton and the history of this amazing building, the Fenton Hotel. We just got a surprise kind of ghost tour, I guess, was what you would call that a little bit.
Yeah.
Our tour guide, Jay, was Dragon's Blood that he was warding off the spirits with?
He's so funny.
That was great.
Yeah.
We got some video of that we can share. But so this is my friend Allie, Allie Siebert. She's local author, local historian, amazing human being that we met by chance over a Taylor Swift t-shirt. So she's a Swiftie too. So put her up, that puts her up a notch.
All good people are, yes.
My friend Allie has written several books about the Fenton area. She has a couple of them with her. They are very cool books. You can order them or get a hold of me or get a hold of Allie. And
they're at the Open Book too.
They're at Open Book here in Fenton. But one of the things we were talking about is the story of how Fenton became Fenton, right? And it's kind of illustrated here, although I'm pretty sure they didn't have $50 greenbacks at the time. And I'm not sure about the Jack Daniels either, but, historically accurate paintings, what can you say? So, Allie, you're really the expert. I mean, I know kind of the myth, but this town was originally Dibbleville, right?
It was, yeah.
Dibble.
So it was founded by Clark Dibble, who originally had settled with several other families in Grumlaw, which is now Grand Blanc.
Which is why they have the Grumlaw Church?
That's exactly it.
I didn't know that.
Surprise.
They changed it from Grumlaw to the Big Nothing.
Well,
I mean, Grand Blanc. Sorry.
I don't love Grumlaw either, to be honest.
Yeah, well,
but that's okay.
Fair.
But yeah, so he was like out on a walk, like exploring, and happened upon a trail that led him to what we now know as Fenton. And he was like, holy moly, I love it here. And he convinced a bunch of other people at the settlement to pack their bags again and move out and come build here. And that's what they did.
Around what time do you think, approximately? Early 1800s?
Yeah, that was 1830s.
1830s.
So I think Fenton was like, 1837?
Yeah.
So that would have been like 35, 36.
Okay. So Clark Dibble comes here, brings some people from Grand Blanc, and basically sets up a lean-to? I mean,
well, that's all it was, because it was wilderness and swamps and everything else. Like, it's hard to imagine, I think, today for a lot of people, because they say, well, Fenton was founded at this time, and you picture the pictures that we have of like all the buildings set up, but it wasn't like that. It was trees, and that was it. There's a really great story about Alonzo Chapin, who was one of like the original Fentonites before it was Fenton, of him in like the 1830s, 40s, 50s-ish. And he had just like a little log house, and that was it. And he lived next door to a bunch of people. And there was one night where he's home alone. It's the summer, so it's really hot, and he's got the windows open and the door open, so there's some breeze, and he hears this noise outside, and he's like, that's weird, like, what is it? And, again, it's trees, it's forest, and he opens the door, and he looks out, and he doesn't see anything, and he closes it, and then he hears it again, and so he opens the door again, and it's described as this giant creature comes like lunging at him, and he has to close the door really fast, and it's like beating up against the door, and he's like holding it with his body, and he doesn't know what it is. He's like, that's just a huge creature. I don't know what that was. And then a couple days later, there's a man in the town who's sick, so he goes to visit him, and he's sitting in there, and the guy's like on his deathbed, and it's by the window. Again, it's hot, so the window's open because the man's sick, and it's gross and everything. But he's sitting there next to him, the guy's sitting here, and he said it's quiet, 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 and then all of a sudden, in through the window comes this giant head, and it's a bobcat, cougar,
Oh my
whatever,
gosh.
yeah. And he's like leaning in, like about to like take a bite of this dying dude, and he like whacks him with the chair, and they go off and they eventually shoot it and kill it because it's like a menace to their tiny
Right.
little society. But like that's the sort of thing that these people had to experience
Holy
like
smokes.
when they first started here, because it wasn't like this. It was
Right.
wilderness.
Right. So they call it Dibbleville.
Yeah.
And then what kind of spurs the growth here after that? Is it the river? Is it the railroad? Is it what?
So the railroad comes in like 1850s.
Okay.
And don't quote me on this because this is not something I know for sure, but I believe Fenton was like the northernmost stop at this point in time.
Okay.
I don't think Flint had a railroad stop at this time. So it kind of became like it was an important spot.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, because the railroad really spurred a lot of growth throughout the country, right?
Yeah.
And so we're here. It's Dibbleville. How do we get to Fenton? How do we decide we're not going to go by Dibbleville anymore, right?
So Clark Dibble, which is a great name, Dibble.
Yeah, Clark Dibble.
He is here. He founds the town, names it after himself. It's Dibbleville. He doesn't stick around super long. I think he goes to Birmingham or something.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I believe he was killed by a falling tree, saving his dog. Saved the dog from the falling tree, but died because it crushed him. That's a tangent. It's okay.
Wow, man's best friend. You gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, but he leaves. One of the things I've heard about the renaming of the town is that they wanted to have like a stronger name than Dibbleville because the capital of Michigan was being decided,
Right.
and they thought Dibbleville sounded kind of silly.
Right.
So,
Well, and I got to imagine at that time, without the same mapping, technology we have, I would think that maybe people would think this is sort of central,
yeah,
central to the state.
yeah,
And I know that when they were doing territories and started moving the capitals around, they were trying to get them in the center of the state, right? So
yeah.
which
makes sense.
I don't know if that's the total logic, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that would be the theory, right?
That's the theory. So they wanted a stronger name, and then the myth is, or the lore is, and there's not really a full understanding of how true this is, but it's possibly true. Who knows? But it's a fun story.
Right.
That 3 of the major names in the town, William Fenton, Benjamin Rockwell, and Robert Leroy,
Right.
sat down and played a poker game. Da-da-da.
Right.
And then apparently during the poker game, the stakes weren't just who wins, it was who gets to name the town.
So how do they get empowered to name the town?
I don't know. That's where there's some holes in this myth,
Right,
know?
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, so we end up with a town named Fentonville,
Mhm.
correct? We end up with a main street named Leroy.
Mhm.
We end up with another street named Rockwell.
Mhm.
But there's a whole bunch of streets like Adelaide,
Mhm.
Caroline,
Yes.
Ellen, Anne.
So Caroline was named after Leroy's sister. So the myth is, or the legend is, as they continued playing, whoever won each hand got to choose a name for something. So the main winner was Fenton, so he named it Fentonville. And then Rockwell won, and he got to name Rockwell Street. And Leroy won, so he named the main drag his Leroy Street. And then Caroline was Leroy's sister. Adelaide was Leroy's wife. I'd have to look at my notes. But Lavinia was one, which is not a street anymore, I don't think, but that's for Rockwell. And so, yeah, they all, like, almost every street here has ties to the history of
These
Fenton.
people.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's Fentonville.
Yes, it's Fentonville.
Now, this building, when the railroads came through, really, the Fenton Hotel itself, and I just want to take a minute to give a shout out to Nick, the owner of the hotel. He has allowed us to come in here before they're open. We got to explore some parts of the hotel that are legendary. We got to go upstairs, right?
Yeah.
You can't stay up there.
I mean,
anymore.
You can.
I mean, you could, like, on a
I'm sure
dare.
There's some raccoons or something that would beg to differ.
Don't play Bloody Mary in the mirrors up there. And then, so this is an early established building, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 1856.
I think
okay.
So.
But it hasn't always been the Fenton Hotel, right?
Correct.
So. Was it called the Fentonville Hotel, or the
first
Vermont House?
Yeah, the initial name was the Vermont House. I don't know why. That's not clear to me. I don't have the history. You're looking at me like that's disappointing.
I'm excited. I'm
but
like, Vermont House.
I have nothing for you.
If I remember correctly from some of our prior conversations, there's a lot of people from like the East Coast that this was like the gold land.
Yeah.
This was the new frontier.
They actually called it during the 1830s through like the late 1850s. New York and the East Coast there, which is where a lot of people came from when they came over from other countries, was getting really overcrowded. And it was growing really fast. And there wasn't enough room to house everybody. There wasn't enough opportunities. Like, a lot of people were farmers, but you can't farm land if everybody's crowding around.
Right.
So they started moving this way, west. And Michigan specifically was
that
known...
That way's west, but it's okay.
This way. Directionally challenged is what I call myself. So they started moving west. And... Michigan specifically was known as being like a really incredible like land of opportunity for like farming and like there's just open land and there's no one here and you can do whatever you want, and that's really how it was advertised.
Not much has really changed.
No, but they called it Michigan fever, which is a really cool like little phrasing.
I think I still have Michigan fever.
Yeah. So people would like just come over to Michigan in droves. So like a lot of times if you're ever researching like your ancestors in Michigan, you'll find ties to New York.
Okay.
Over there, yeah.
One little interesting tidbit you told me about was the phones. So the telephones. What was going on with that?
Yeah, it was 1883. So when the telephone like was invented, this was like cutting edge technology in the 1880s.
Right.
I believe it was invented in 1876 by Graham Bell.
Yep.
And in 1883 already, the Fenton Hotel had a telephone, which is huge. That would have been like a really...
So in 1883, Martha was calling up here and saying, "Send George home.
Yeah.
He's been at the bar too long."
And it's interesting to think because you picture like telephones. I don't know. When I think of like an old phone, I think of like 1950 phones. But this would have been really early. So what would have had to have happened was it's this big wooden box with a bell on it. And if you want to make a call, you pick it up. And somehow that connects you to the operator, who is like an actual person who's sitting in the office down the street, and you say, "I want to talk to George." And they say, "Okay." So they plug in George's wire, and George's phone rings, and then you can talk to George. But it's this whole operation.
So my great-grandmother, Grandma Mason, she was an operator in Rochester. That was one of her first jobs.
That's so cute.
She would sit there in the room and, "Who are you calling?" Plug in the lines until it all got automated more. So.
Which is It's crazy.
All right, so the telephone comes. So this building's changed names a couple of times, but one of the lures on the building, and we have some pictures. It used to have these grand balconies, right, that overlooked the town.
Yes.
And there's some pictures like with the band out front, and so tell me a little bit more about what happened.
Okay, so this would have been 1904,
Right.
February 17th, 1904. So at this point, the hotel had balconies stretching on the second story and the third story.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful, really ornate. Now at this point, people are still using horses and carriages to travel. Not everyone, but it was still, I mean, we're rural Michigan. It's
Right.
the way it was. So people are still using that. A man named John Moyer is taking his horses down Main Street, and he's going past the depot. And it's not entirely clear, like, if he was riding with them or walking with them, but either way, they're connected to each other. And there's two of them. And they're going past the depot. Something spooks the horses. He loses control of them. They are freaking out. They dash across Main Street, come over to where the Fenton Hotel is, and the balconies themselves are held up by these like posts, but they're not super secure in the ground, I guess.
Well,
What you can, what are you gonna do?
there's not a lot of permitting back then, I'm pretty sure.
The two horses are, just in a craze. They get on either side of the post, so there's like a rope in between them, and they go like through the posts, taking down each one as they go.
It's like a clothesline.
Yeah. And then down comes the balcony. Unfortunately, nobody was hurt. Horses were fine. A couple windows were broken, and obviously the balconies were destroyed. But the owner at the time, who was it here in 1904?
I'm
I
not
have
sure
it.
who had.
I'm going to say his name because it's important to me.
All right.
This would have been
So let's see. What I show here
Hurd.
is Seed and Flint, Mr. Seed,
So that's who.
1856.
Yeah. So this would have been Hurd owned it at the time.
Oh, there's some great names here. So
Yeah.
Abner Roberts.
Yeah.
He's the second proprietor, and he names it Fenton House.
He does.
The Fenton House, which we
Yes.
have.
Yeah.
Right? We have the Fenton House. And then there's some other great names here. D.W. Denio? Denio.
Hmm.
Man, nobody goes by D.W. anymore. You don't really get that. But let's see. Dancing, waltzing,
Yeah.
most of the night.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was like a entertainment hub.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I don't know. Did Jay took me up to the ballroom.
Oh,
And I don't know if we did that on our second tour, but it's like this big open space, and that's where those things would have been.
so upstairs.
Held. Yeah.
All right.
It's still there. I think they're using it for storage right now.
Probably.
But you can go up there and kind of like imagine everybody
just waltzing.
Yeah.
So then, let's see. Byron Hurd.
Correct.
So he puts it back. He puts a kitchen in, and then the horses
Mm-hmm.
take out the town.
Yes.
Or not the town. Not the whole town. They don't take the whole town down, just the awning,
Yes.
just the balconies,
Yes.
right?
But Byron, I guess, was very adamant, like, let's get this taken care of right now. And he had his team back out there like the next day rebuilding. And it's February, so it's cold. But
Oh boy.
they're rebuilding, but they never actually rebuild the
The first.
the
Yeah, I think they did the second story balcony.
yes.
Yeah.
They only the second story porch was rebuilt, so the third one was a goner. But
So it changes hands a little bit more. It changes names too. When it becomes, for a little while, it's no longer the Fenton House.
mhm.
It becomes.
The Denio house.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, well, that makes sense. After Mr. DW,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And DeNeo actually owned Idlewild, which was a fun little thing to say just there, and I realized that. But he owned Idlewild, which is it was one of the first hotels on Long Lake.
Right.
Long Lake used to be like this lake resort
Yeah.
with all of these hotels, and there's these giant boats that would take people around on tours, and there's camping, and it was like a hot spot.
Yeah, they had camp. They had an amusement park, like a mini amusement park on one of the islands on Lake Fenton.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they
That's
had
cool.
like, I mean, like the gravity-driven
Yeah.
style, like carnival rides and
that's so
stuff, and you
cool.
had to take a mini steamboat to get. It was like Boblo Island miniature.
That's so cool.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I have some friends who have showed me pictures of that who've lived on the
Really?
lake forever.
I'll have to look at those. Yeah,
I'll
that's
get some of those
cool.
for you. So Prohibition comes.
Hmm.
Is
Yeah.
this like a speakeasy? Do they break out the bottles? Do you know, or did they
So-
just keep operating?
So interestingly enough, Prohibition, they passed the law in 1920,
Right.
but Michigan beat people to sobriety by 2 years. So they, a lot of counties in Michigan, Genesee included, were dry by 1918, and I think that definitely took a toll on the business
Right.
because you can't. I mean, we're looking at a bar, so what are you gonna do?
And it's a great looking bar.
It
I gotta
is.
tell you. I've enjoyed many a drink there.
Have you?
Yes.
What's your favorite?
Here?
Yeah.
Well, they always have a great selection of beer. Like they have the standards, but
Sure.
they always have something a little interesting.
Yeah.
And it's not pure IPA. Nothing against my IPA enthusiasts. That's just not my favorite kind of beer. So it's nice to have a place that has that.
Yeah.
My wife and I, when we were dating, we would meet here like once a week, and we would sit at the bar. I usually have an old fashioned. That's one of my favorites.
Me too.
And then we would share lobster bisque, breadsticks, and Caesar salad,
That's so cute.
or the Leroy Street salad,
That's
which
so
she loves
cute.
very much. So,
That's so cute.
and I wasn't familiar with Fenton till then.
Yeah.
I grew up Clarkston, Rochester area, so this was new to me. And those towns have some really cool history too. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
But the train towns, I think, really
Yeah.
like hitting Holly, Fenton, and even a little bit of Linden.
Hmm.
You have this very interesting long history because of the commerce and
Yeah.
the ability. Because you had the lumber barons too, right? You had the shutters at the White House, at the original White House, were made,
They were.
designed and made here.
Yeah. A.J. Phillips Factory.
At A.G. Phillips Factory,
Yeah.
right? So, that's a story for another time. So we get through Prohibition, and we're having some parties. Things are coming back to normal. Around 1946, the hotel gets bought again
Hmm.
and renamed.
Yes. So at that point, it becomes Hotel Fenton. And it, continues to be kind of like this go-to place for fine dining, for banquets, for gatherings, get-togethers.
The place has caught on fire a couple of times,
It has.
which happens from time to time in a lot of these historic buildings, right? So one of the first times that it kind of burns was that 1951 that I think it's.
Yeah, I don't know if it was one of the first times, but that was definitely like a pretty serious one.
Yeah.
It was January 29th, 1951, and the fire broke out early hours. It was about 5 a.m. And at that point, it's still functioning as a hotel/apartment sort of situation.
Right.
So people were still living here.
There's no sprinklers. There's probably no fire alarms.
Hmm.
And the building catches on fire.
Yeah.
Do you know about how much of it got damaged?
Yeah. So there's actually a really interesting story about this fire specifically. So it's 1951. So there's, you don't have a cell phone. You don't have ways of contacting people quickly and immediately.
Well, they have a big brown box where they
Yeah.
can, hello,
Exactly.
we need the fire department.
Well, actually,
Please hold, sir.
yeah, for real though. So there's this really great kind of heroic story about Joseph Capo, who was a bartender here at the time in 1951. And he and his family were living on the second story. He had a wife and 2 young children. And now, keep in mind, it's January, and Michigan January, it's freezing cold.
Yeah.
So
I'm
Joseph,
familiar.
yeah, same. Sometimes March also.
Yeah, like today.
Yeah, exactly. So Joseph wakes up around 5 a.m., smells smoke, is like, oh shoot, there's a fire, opens his door and sees that the flames are coming up the stairway to like the main floor. So he's essentially stuck. He wakes up his kids and his wife, breaks the window, breaks the screen, and next to their window is a tall tree. So he grabs his son, carries him by like sliding down the tree, and he's just wearing his shorts. So like he's like Superman. And he's like, you know what I mean? So he's like carrying his little 8-year-old, slides down the tree, puts him on the ground, climbs back up the tree, grabs his 12-year-old daughter, slides down the tree, climbs back up the tree, grabs his wife, slides down the tree, climbs back up the tree, because she was only wearing her nightgown and he didn't want her to be cold. Take notes, gentlemen.
Hey.
And he was like,
Happy wife, happy life.
absolutely. So he was like, he climbs back in, goes and gets her pants and her coat, and brings them back down. And that wasn't enough for him. He's like, I'm going to go save the rest of everyone else. Climbs back up the tree, or maybe not. I don't know. However, he got back in. But he went in and he starts knocking on doors because people are still sleeping. It's 5 a.m. And there's a really great bit in the newspaper articles at the time where people are like quoting what they're saying. And I guess he's knocking on the door of this older lady, and he's banging, banging, banging. Finally, she opens. And meanwhile, there's a fire blazing. Right. And he's like, okay, there's a fire, like you need to leave. And she's like, it's only 5 a.m. and I haven't gotten much sleep. And he's like, sorry, but please come down. Yeah. And so she did.
Oh, wow. That's good. That sounds like how I would react.
Same.
Fire. I need a minute. Let me pull it together. Can I get some coffee?
Yeah. There's another lady who I guess was like, but I haven't washed my clothes. They're like, I think that's going to have to wait.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Grab the wash basin.
Yeah, exactly.
On your way out.
So they, they get everybody out, and his wife calls the fire department. And there's another quote from the guy on the fire department who was like, I got the call, and I was like, it's 10 degrees outside. I don't want to go. And then he heard that it was the Fenton Hotel. He said, I didn't care how cold it was. I rushed out of bed and came down, and they were able to get the fire controlled, but it took 5 hours.
Holy crap.
And a lot of the second story was burned, nearly destroyed the kitchen. They said it originated in the kitchen. So the kitchen was destroyed. The main lobby and dining area were fine, but there was a lot of water and smoke damage.
Yeah.
So, but Joe, God bless him, I guess the firemen had to tell him to stop because he kept rushing in to try to save everything. And I guess...
So he loved this place.
He loved it.
Yeah.
So when they finally told him to stop, he was on his way out with the cash register and the TV. like the dude was committed, which we love.
Well, that's awesome. So I think I was reading that the estimated damage at the time was around $20,000, which is close to like $300,000 today.
Yeah.
But we've looked around. I mean, they've done a heck of a job, at least giving the mystique
Yeah.
that it's still very historical here. And I think that's one of the things that really attracts people to this place. You know, if you're sitting at the bar or you're having food here, you can almost feel the longtime presence of all of the history, all the people who've been through here.
Yeah.
When we were setting up, we were looking at the floors, and I was like, you know, there's thousands of feet have scraped these floors, right? So our current owner, Nick Rice, he is this very kind, humble man.
He's so cute.
When I approached him about, you know, how much we love the hotel and, you know, us working on some projects here in town for the history of Fenton, he said, well, do I have to be in the video? And I said, no. And he goes, good, fine, go ahead, you can do it. I was like, oh, I wish all of them were that easy.
No
Not
kidding.
everybody's that easily convinced.
Joke.
So what did we miss? Any good stories? Any cool things, you know, that maybe we didn't catch?
You know, I think just like the main point of all of this is just like how important knowing the history of where you are is.
Yeah.
Because, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I'm sure a million times, it's not just the history of the town. If you're living here, even if you spend time here, it's your history too.
Right. I think that's totally fair.
Yeah. And so like yeah, it's cool, it's an old building, whatever, it's great, but there's so many lives who, you know, they celebrated here, they had tragedies here, they had their, you know, day-to-day jobs here, and like recognizing those kinds of people and those kinds of stories and not letting them just fade into obscurity, I think is really, really important.
Well, and I have talked about this a little bit, and we're hoping to be able to provide some more of that. But there's a lot of cool people who lived here. There was a lot of cool growth that lived here. And, you know, when you live in a society where we live in right now, which is pretty hyper information, and you get it and throw it away, right? Like, you'll hear about somebody famous from 2 years ago, but if you brought their name up, unless you're like, my brother's like a savant when it comes to history, right? But I don't always, it takes me a minute.
Yeah.
But there are these incredible people who worked really hard to create this town, right?
Yes.
And it's been through a lot. It was a lean-to with bobcats, right? And then it evolves with the railroad and with the lumber and with A.J. Phillips, and then you've got bankers. And I think I was reading Colonel Fenton was actually one of the founders of Citizens Bank when he went to Flint.
Really?
So, like, you know, shutters were made here, sent to the White House.
Yes.
So you have this really cool, interesting past that, you know, maybe it's not, people in LA probably don't care. You know, I mean, maybe they do, I don't know. But for us here, I think part of one of the joys of living in a town like this is if you can understand the history, if you can know the myths, it makes it more fun to live here.
It does.
It
well,
does.
And you feel more connected to it. Like, my husband wants to kill me half the time because when we're walking down the side streets, I'm like, oh, there's, you know, Floyd's old house, there's Letty's old house, there's, you know, and it's obnoxious. But to me, like, it just feels like they lived there hundreds of years ago. But I feel like I don't know, it makes it so meaningful to me. And I think even if you just, you know, take some time to learn about things like this, more general history, you'll feel more connected to your town and you'll care about what's happening to it.
Well, you know why the streets have those names, you know how things developed. And this was a central hub. And you know, and for most of America, your little town started as a bunch of lean-tos, a postmaster box, and a place to gather and eat.
Yeah.
And, you know, hopefully sing and dance and have a good time.
Yes.
So, Allie, I really appreciate you doing all this research, talking to me. We've had some great conversations. It's great to do this. If people wanted to, because I know this is something that you do, if people have a historic home or a historic building, and they wanted your help knowing more, what's the best way for them to talk to you?
Yeah, so, and even if it's not super historic, I feel like that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. And, my house is 1867. Nobody special lived there, but like to me, they're special. So, like, even if you're like, well, it's an old house, but I don't know how historic it is, it's still important. If you want to reach out to me, my company is called Household History. You can visit our website, it's householdhistory.com, or you can, yeah, that's probably the best way.
I think that's a great way to do it. And yeah, I mean, just because, the history of your home, one of the cool things about Fenton, when I'm helping people sell some of the historic homes, is what I have found is each owner has passed down historic things that they got from the previous owner. So one of the houses we're hoping to feature in the near future, they have all this original stuff from the Phipps family all over the house that they basically inherited when they bought the house. I have a house coming up for sale on Adelaide. A local historian lived there in the early 1900s. He wrote a little book about the town, and it's still there. All the stuff is still there. So, it's just, I don't know. Maybe some people don't care. I don't know. I just think it's really fun. It's really fun and really cool to just kind of have context for where you live and what you're doing. So, thank you so much. We got some video with Jay that shows the second story and the much sought after third story, which I gotta tell you, it was really cool to see. I don't know if it's a letdown for people or not, but the room with all the chairs in a circle, I don't know. I think maybe there's still some square dancing going on up there or something, because the ghosts are up there having a committee meeting. Maybe they're going to rename the town.
Well, my favorite thing up there is the wallpaper.
Oh yeah.
I know you're sick of me saying this, but it's so gorgeous, and it's just like they're all like all the rooms are different wallpaper.
They are.
And it's just like, I don't know, it's very
door
quaint.
slabs. Every room has a little sink in it. You can definitely get a feel for how life has changed. And hotels didn't used to be like one night stops for most. People would like shack up for 3-4 months sometimes. So the community that's been in this space, we still have a poker tournament to celebrate and fundraise for the schools here. And so big shout out to Nick for letting us come in here. Big shout out to Jay, who we just ran into. If you hear some boot scraping and some chairs wobbling around, we interrupted him putting the restaurant, getting it ready for tonight. And so check out some of the video we got of the upstairs, and we've got more for you. I'm really hoping we've got some more for you here. We've got some great homes, some great buildings downtown, and we're going to share a lot of Fenton history here throughout the year. So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
About this. Yes.